I thought that we were very close with Russia to having a deal. I thought we were very close with Ukraine to having a deal. In fact, other than President Zelensky, his people loved the concept of the deal. You know, we threw something out.
And one more point, we are ready to work with President Trump in any format. And if President Trump is speaking more about elections in Ukraine, I want to say this very openly. We can try to hold elections. Ukraine is not hiding from democracy, but to make elections possible, there must be a security component, and America can help with this the most. If there is a need for elections now, there must be a ceasefire at least during election process and during voting, and this is something that must be discussed. And honestly, we think here in Ukraine that America should speak to the Russian side about this. Let's see what's next.
Mr. President, just briefly, you made a commitment to the Europeans back in July, if I remember right, to participate in some kind of a peacekeeping force should there be a peace agreement. You mentioned, I think, air support, intelligence, and so forth. Does that commitment still stand? Is the U.S. ready to go contribute to this?
It's called the security agreement, basically, that they call it. The security
like
agreement. Yeah, we would help. We would help with security because it's, I think, a necessary factor in getting it done. I thought that we were very close with Russia to having a deal. I thought we were very close with Ukraine to having a deal. In fact, other than President Zelensky, his people loved the concept of the deal. You know, we threw something out.
This is the four-part deal that you...
Well, there's 4 or 5 different parts. It's, you know, a little bit complicated because you're cutting up land in a certain way. It's not the easiest thing. It's sort of like a complex real estate deal times 1,000, right? But it's a deal that would have stopped the killing of thousands of lives every month. Thousands and thousands of lives, mostly soldiers, but as you know there's some bombs being...
Are you headed to sort of a Korea-like ceasefire there where you don't resolve?
Well, there's a meeting on Saturday. We'll see whether or not we attend the meeting. We said we'll attend the meeting if we think there's a good chance of... They want me to attend. They want us to attend. And we'll be attending the meeting on Saturday in Europe if we think there's a good chance. And we don't want to waste a lot of time. We think it's negative. We want it to get settled. We want to save a lot of lives. As you know, in the past we spent could be $350 billion giving it to Ukraine. You know, we got nothing in return, but we gave it to Ukraine. I ended up getting rare earth in return, even though I didn't spend money. And we are now selling weapons to NATO. We're not selling it to Ukraine. We're selling weapons at full price to NATO, as you know. They distribute those weapons probably to Ukraine for the most part. They're probably doing it to others also. But we're not involved in the war other than the fact that we are involved in a negotiation because people want us there. Ukraine wants us involved very much. Europe wants us involved. I have a great relationship with the countries of Europe. As you know, I took GDP. I took what they're spending as a percentage of GDP, but it was at 2 and they weren't paying, and now it's at 5, and everybody's amazed. But that 5% is, a lot of it's coming back to the United States. With that being said, I'd like to see the killing stop. 25,000 people died last month, soldiers, mostly soldiers, but some people also where bombs were dropped. But for the most part, 25,000 soldiers died last month. I would love to see it stop. And we're working very hard. It doesn't really affect the United States unless it got out of control. You know, a thing like that, as you probably know, because you are a professional, a real professional, which is something I don't say about a lot of other people, but you are a great professional. Things like this end up in third world wars. And I told that the other day. I said, you know, everybody keeps playing games like this. You'll end up in a third world war, and we don't want to see that happen.
Dear Keir Emmanuel, and thank you for co-hosting today's meeting. Dear friends, leaders, I'm happy that we have today's conversation. About an hour ago, we had conversation with the United States team about possible security guarantees for Ukraine. And we are working on a framework document, and it must be strong enough to truly work. We believe this document should be approved by the United States Congress. This would mean real, solid legally binding security guarantees for our country, and they must actually be implemented. Of course, working model of security guarantees is impossible, and we underlined it, impossible without Europe and all members of our coalition of the willing, from Canada to Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. Thank you all. Everyone's contribution matters, and I believe most of you already know what is needed and how this can work. And now we need to coordinate everything so that the Americans are fully on board in every process. Yesterday we also talked with American team about an economic agreement and what US involvement could look like in Ukraine's recovery and post-war development. And also yesterday we sent the American team a revised version of the framework document we worked on. It includes 20 key points. These can be the foundation for everything, and I'm waiting for feedback from America. It's very important that I thank Mark Rutte and every leader who keeps emphasizing this, that you personally, along with your defense ministers and military leadership, continue working together through the Pearl program. And this program needs to be actively filled with content and concrete actions. And thank you to everyone who is helping us keep the front line stable, strengthen our air defense, and maintain our overall resilience, especially now as Russian strikes on our energy infrastructure continue each day. And I urge everyone to move forward as quickly as possible on the issue of using frozen Russian assets. I'm grateful for the leadership of the EU, of Ursula von der Leyen, Antonio Costa, and everyone who is helping. And this is truly necessary, and it will make a significant contribution to our security, our shared security. And one more point, we are ready to work with President Trump in any format. And if President Trump is speaking more about elections in Ukraine, I want to say this very openly. We can try to hold elections. Ukraine is not hiding from democracy, but to make elections possible, there must be a security component, and America can help with this the most. If there is a need for elections now, there must be a ceasefire at least during election process and during voting, and this is something that must be discussed. And honestly, we think here in Ukraine that America should speak to the Russian side about this. Let's see what's next. And so I ask you to support Ukraine in this and other important matters. Thank you again, Kir.